Imagine this scenario. You wake up in the morning and go to check your phone. You notice that none of the apps are loading. Confused, you try switching between them, but it's no use. Problem is not with your device, but rather with the internet. It's down. You might think this can't happen, but just in case, do you know what would happen if the internet went down for 7 days? Let's find out. Day 1. Chaos. The first day without the internet would be pure chaos. People would start getting nervous if they couldn't access their emails or load web pages. But at this point, most people would still believe that it's a temporary outage and it'll be back up soon. However, there would be panic among businesses whose online services were down. Many companies have cloud-based systems that allow employees to work from anywhere. Without the internet, all those workers would be unable to do anything. Plus, the company wouldn't be able to reach its customers, since many companies have shifted to online platforms to interact with their consumers. They might try reaching out through landlines, but it would take too long and it'd only be effective for short messages. There's also the possibility that hackers could take advantage of the situation, since most routers and networks don't have adequate security measures when not connected to the internet. It'd be very easy to hack into a company's system and steal sensitive information. Day 2. Confusion. On the second day, people would begin to get confused. Some would think that the government had shut down the internet, while others would blame it on a cyber attack. The reality is that anyone could have caused this problem. A single person could have accidentally knocked out a major internet hub and caused a cascading failure that took down the entire system. We rely so much on the internet that we never think about what happens when it goes down. Even things like GPS navigation systems would stop working. Planes would be unable to track their positions accurately and would have to make landings based on visual cues alone. That is, of course, if the pilots didn't decide to panic and turn around. With no way of knowing how long it'd take for the internet to come back up, airline traffic would likely come to a standstill. The second day would end with everyone wondering how the world was going to continue functioning. Day 3. Panic. By the third day, panic would begin to set in. People would realize the gravity of the situation and the fact that it could get worse. For example, some people might have been waiting for critical medical equipment to arrive, but it's delayed because the delivery company can't confirm the address. Hospitals would start experiencing shortages of vital supplies. They wouldn't be able to deliver babies, run tests, order blood transfusions, and perform surgeries. People who need medical attention might not get it, and as a result, many would die. This could cause further panic among the population, as they would see hospitals as death traps. The stock market would also experience major issues. Investors would struggle to stay afloat, as they wouldn't be able to process trades or obtain real-time information. Banks would close as they'd be unable to verify transactions or access important client data. People would scramble to withdraw their cash, but banks wouldn't be able to hand it out as they'd have no idea how much money they actually had available. All of these complications would lead to the economy grinding to a halt. Day 4. Hunger. On the fourth day, grocery stores would start running out of food. People would realize that they needed to eat, and fast food restaurants were going to magically conjure up burgers and fries out of thin air. Most people don't realize how much of their daily sustenance is delivered. If you live in a big city, chances are you're eating food that came from farms miles away. You might also be consuming products made by companies that rely on parts coming from other countries. But without the internet, all that becomes impossible. Farmers would have no way of knowing what prices were like or where to sell their goods. Factories would shut down due to lack of materials or power outages. All those delicious meals would simply go to waste. Food shortages would cause more panic as people would fear that the next day they would go hungry. As a result, they would stock up on non-perishables and canned goods. Unfortunately, all that food would eventually run out, leaving people desperate for sustenance. Day 5. Thirst. The fifth day would be marked by thirst. With no functional water treatment plants, people would struggle to find drinkable water. Municipalities would need to rely on old-fashioned methods of purifying water, which would take a long time and wouldn't meet the demands of the population. Water would become a precious resource, and riots would erupt as people fought over it. Tap water would become undrinkable, and people would need to boil it before drinking. But even then, boiling water would be a luxury as power stations would probably be struggling to function, and rolling blackouts would be the norm. At this point, bottled water would become a highly sought-after commodity, People would pay exorbitant prices for it. Those who lived near natural sources of fresh water, such as lakes and rivers, would have an advantage over everyone else. But the moment word got out, everyone would rush to those areas, causing conflicts and possibly even war. Day 6. Darkness. On the 6th day, darkness would fall. No electricity means no lights, no fans, no heaters, no AC. It also means no street lamps and no security cameras. Crime rates would skyrocket as people desperately tried to survive. They would resort to looting grocery stores and houses. They might also try stealing cars to escape to safer locations or to get away from the chaos. Without the GPS system, though, most drivers would be lost and the cars would quickly run out of gas. Looting and rioting would cause the National Guard to intervene. They would try to restore order, but without communication systems, they'd have a hard time coordinating their efforts. People would get fed up with the violence and try to flee to safer environments. Major highways would become battlegrounds as everyone tried to leave the cities and head to the countryside. Unfortunately, most people don't know how to drive off-road, so the journey would prove to be quite challenging. Day 7. Dying. The 7th day would be marked by dying. People would run out of medicine and food. There would be no doctors to help those who fell ill and no hospitals to treat them. The only hope would be for a few scientists and researchers who had been working on antidotes for common diseases. But even then, they wouldn't have enough resources to keep everyone alive. Pregnant women would face the grim reality that their babies would likely not survive. Newborns would die because there would be no vaccines or incubators to keep them alive. Corpses would pile up in the streets, and the living would struggle to cope with the stench. People would grow weak and emaciated as they struggled to find nourishment. Those who had access to clean water would still have the advantage, but they, too, would eventually die from starvation and exposure to the elements. Without the internet, life as we know it would simply cease to exist. In fact, the internet is so ingrained in our society that it's difficult to imagine what would happen if it went down. It's safe to say that there would be widespread panic and chaos. But how long would civilization last without it? We can only speculate, but one thing is for sure, it wouldn't be pretty. The truth is that the internet has become an essential part of modern life. It allows us to communicate with each other, access information, and do business electronically. It's made our lives easier in many ways, but it's also made us dependent on it. We've become so used to having the internet at our fingertips that we don't even think about what would happen if it went away. The fact is that if the internet went down for any significant amount of time, it would cause massive chaos and panic. But it's not something that we need to worry about anytime soon. The internet is extremely resilient, and there are always backup systems in place to ensure that it stays online. Plus, there are so many redundant pathways that even if one part of the network goes down, there are plenty of other routes that data can take to get where it needs to go. So sit back and relax. The internet isn't going down anytime soon.